Yeah, I know a lot of people, which I think would struggle with that concept of just like picking up and moving, even just moving out of their house, even if it's into another house. I'm sure you've seen it, but I've seen cases where, it's like out of the fire or out of the pot into the fire where they move from one home to another really quickly. They didn't do the diligence on did that new home they were moving into have mold? Or they assumed that because the house was new, that there wasn't enough time. Because that's another assumption that people make is that the house has to be old and has had to have a history of water damage for mold to proliferate. But it only takes 48 hours for the stuff to start growing. And a lot of people don't realize new construction is not all that great. We use cheap labor and cheap materials, and corners are cut. And oftentimes that's what leads to very quickly to mold growth. In my case, we had mold, in our brand new home. Within 2 years of being there, when we tapped the wall cavity and measured spore counts, we were in some cases over 1 million spore counts. But in most cases, the wall cavities were 50,000 plus in almost every wall cavity of the house. So the house was just generating mold or just feeding mold because it was improperly constructed from the get-go. And so moisture just, it couldn't control the moisture. And the moisture, it wasn't a running leak that led, in my case, it was just a moisture problem because of improper construction.
Yeah, I think that people, fail to realize that, for sure, in the sense that if you look at a new home, how it's constructed, obviously the vast, vast, vast majority of homes are made out of wood. They're made out of popsicle sticks. Those popsicle sticks, they arrive already moldy because of the way the popsicle sticks are made. Then they sit and they're put up in under construction. And what happens, whether you're in Houston, you're in Chicago, you're in New York, or you're in San Francisco, it rains on your home. The wood is water damaged again. And then you put it up into the drywall, you seal it in, you just create the perfect conditions for excess humidity in there. And now you've just got this total infestation of mold and bacteria into the home. And if someone has an old home, for 100% it has mold, no doubt. If someone has a brand new home, just to your point of like, it's 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 certainly, very. We lived in Arizona, quote unquote, dry climate. But undoubtedly, the entire fabric of that home, Colorado, where we live, dry climate, just the entire fabric. I would sit there on my couch in Colorado and I would look at the neighbor's house under construction, and it would snow and then it would melt and then it would snow and then it would melt all over this guy's wood. California, notorious for that. The high humidity there on all those beach houses, California. Um, you think about what happens with the California Palisades fire, and now you aerosolized all those homes, and now you put that into the atmosphere. You put it, down if you're living downstream from that. So not only did you burn up someone's mold box, but then all the plastics and phthalates and parabens and all the other contaminants of the home, and you're breathing that in this cloud of poison downstream from that. It's just horrific. One more thing I want to add on that too, and I know you talk about this, is that all of your belongings are contaminated. So all of your clothing, your high school yearbook, your wedding dress, whatever you're saying, it's all contaminated. It's all contaminated. And the best thing I think you can do is take all that stuff put it into storage, and maybe you'll come back sometime in the future to take a look at it if you need to. But all that stuff's contaminated. If you bring that into a new home, you are bringing in the old contaminants into the new. So even a lot of people say, yeah, I don't feel well in the new home. Yeah, certainly the new home can be contaminated, but you brought your stuff with it. Even people who move into, an RV, if you take your old clothing, your old belongings into the brand new RV, you're just going to cross-contaminate it, which just really highlights how difficult of a situation we're dealing with. And Peter, I talk to heart attack people, stroke people all day long. And you can imagine that you tell people, hey, you got to eat this way, you got to go to sleep, you got to get sunshine, you got to get out of all these toxins, you got to take all these expensive tests, take all these expensive supplements. And they're like, forget it. I'm just going to take a Lipitor, I'm just going to take my blood pressure drugs. I'm going to listen to the conventional doc. The problem is when you listen to the conventional docs, you're going to die. It's not either or. You're going to die their way. The average American male life expectancy is age 76. And the last 15 years plus of that are just in horrific health. Arthritic complaints, inflammatory issues, doctor visits, pharmacy visits. It's just monumentally catastrophic. It goes back to the Bible, where Moses talks about this 3,500 years ago in the book of Leviticus, what to do if your home has water damage. And what Moses says, if you can't fix it, you got to tear the whole place down. And they knew that 3,500 years ago, and people don't get it today.
Yeah, I found that it's interesting. A lot of times when you just look to the Bible, you could see that somebody has written about, the answer already, and it's very clear about mold. Every stone, every timber must be taken down and taken to the outside of town, right, away and buried in an unclean place. And that, a lot of people are just trying to hold on to it, understandably so. I think most people, their number one investment is their home, right? If you think about, and so like financially it becomes a tremendous burden. In your experience helping people navigate mold, I'm sure you come across people where like budgetarily they're maybe stuck a little bit. What are some things that you give them or advise them to do, in those types of situations where maybe they can't pick up and move, or maybe they're just unwilling to pick up and move? But are there stopgaps that you recommend, or are there certain nutrients, or there certain treatments or protocols that you would have them do as a stopgap until they kind of make their mind up one way or the other?
Yeah, and believe me, just like you, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on our personal, experiences, trying to avoid mold and or bacteria. I've got countless stories about whether it's hotels, vacation rentals, getting rid of clothing, getting rid of cars. So yes, so we're coming from, and again, as I say this right now, with God as my witness, we live in a vinyl tent in Sandpoint, Idaho. We're going to make it south. We're going to continue to live in vinyl. We often change out the vinyl tents and the mattresses and all those things that we do. Okay, so what can we do if we still live in water damage? Well, I think that, really it's kind of twofold. Really threefold. Clean out the air the best that you can, air purification systems and things like that. But then support your body to the best that you can with the right food, the sunshine, the sleep, the physical activity, movement, chiropractic care, taking care of your teeth. All those basic tenets are undoubtedly going to help you combat the onslaught from these other environmental toxins. And then I think the binder aspect of, can we bind up some of these toxins so we don't reabsorb them, we poop them out the other side? So binders, I think, can be very beneficial here. Humic acid, fulvic acid, the bentonite clays, the charcoals, the organic psyllium husks. All these things have pluses and minuses to them. Sauna is a great way. Sweating is a fantastic way to get rid of these mold mycotoxins. These are proven to be in sweat. Again, the data is still young on this, but it also makes common sense. So that'll be another factor. And I think also, that, again, just going back to the food story, we're really big into eating seafood, wild salmon, sardines, anchovies. We're big fans of wild salmon roe, so eating the fish eggs, all the nutrients that's in that. A lot of the mold mycotoxins cause such excess oxidative stress. So how do we repair the oxidative stress? Fix those cell membranes and things like that. And I think that's where the seafood really comes in like a superstar. The other is organ-based products. We sell a product which are unvaccinated bison organs from South Dakota, liver, heart, kidney, which are fantastic in that arena. And then, really just trying to, if your gut microbiome is being destroyed, how do you keep your gut microbiome healthy? And I think it's really all those similar tenets that we talk about where, give your body what it needs, take away what it doesn't, and that's going to be the strategy.
Yeah. Do you ever see people get better if they're still in it? Like how much does all that kind of thing move the needle for people in your experience?
I think for a lot of people, it undoubtedly improves them. I know you'll agree with this too, that we get concerned about all these other environmental toxins, and another big player is EMF, and a lot of people become extremely EMF sensitive, especially when they're living in the mold, and then as they maybe do some of these other strategies, they deal with things better. But I don't think anybody really improves 100%, Peter, until they're out of the mold. Um, and candidly, again, it could take a long time. Some people recover very quickly. Some people, it just there's such extensive damage from living a whole life in mold. I think back to, my father. I've told this story on your stage before at your event about my dying, but they give him the label of PSP, and simultaneously, serendipitously, God, intervened, put this young woman in front of my face, and she's a doctor of chiropractic, and she told me all the reasons why my father was sick and dying. And one thing we didn't really talk about a lot back then, Peter, in 2005, was the mold issue. And my father was born into mold. My father, like anybody was, my father lived in mold throughout his entire life. The house that we lived in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, I remember it flooded twice. It was a beautiful home. My father was a very successful cardiologist. We lived in a beautiful home that flooded twice. And maybe once they tore up the carpet or whatever they did, there was no mention whatsoever of mold related to that. But as I think about it now, right, the must smell, the must is mold. And the impact of that, with my father, the story that generated, with that, and then also, as the mold and the bacteria digest the components of the home, that releases all the different VOCs, the volatile organic compounds or chemicals that we breathe in that generates the smell. We're not smelling the mycotoxins, but we're smelling the VOCs, and that's a whole nother, spectrum of really understanding. If your house smells, I mean, it's one final thing too, Peter. We went into we were down in Costa Rica, and we were up in the mountains, and we walked into this house considering it as an Airbnb. And my wife, again, like, didn't even want to go in the house. I'm like, come on, let's go in, let's just take a look. We need somewhere to live, down here, temporarily. And we go into the house, and it smelled like curry. It smelled like somebody was cooking a whole bunch of Indian food in the house. And the person who was showing this the house said, no one has been in the house for 6 weeks. And it smelled like curry, so it's like all those different smells, that are coming out, and it's just the mold and the bacteria that are digesting the home, that are releasing the VOCs, and it's really monumental. And I so appreciate you allowing me to share some of my stories and all this stuff for the listeners, because if you're sick in any way of anything, symptoms or not, any kind of, people talk about family history, well, your family members lived in mold, and so do you, and you're sick because of it.
Yeah, so you're more of the opinion that pretty much every home has a potential issue. How do people navigate that overwhelming thought and move forward?
Yeah, again, it's the diagnosis is kind of the easy part, it's like what to do with it. That's the difficult part. And I think a lot of people too, the doctors are all in denial. Why don't more people adopt this? Because the doctors would realize they live in a mold box as well, and now they have to deal with it. So that's going to be a definitive factor. There is really this whole denial, process. But really just kind of accepting the fact that, yeah, the majority, if not all, the houses are water damaged, and now what are you going to do about it? Hopefully your spouse will be supportive. Hopefully your people around you will be supportive. A lot of people, especially these women, they're so brain fogged, they can't even concept what to do. I think another thing, Peter, too, hopefully, is that people like you and I, maybe we can get some investors with us. And how do we create really mold-free housing for people to temporarily live? And we think about this, how we would set up something where you've got structures that are either vinyl or maybe they're built out of concrete, steel, and glass. They are safe houses, and then people arrive at your compound and you give them like the Karen Silkwood treatment. You blast them with fire hoses, you give them brand new organic clothing, and allow them to kind of cleanse their brain and try and figure out how they can deal with this. I think it really represents opportunities for entrepreneurs to come up with ways to slowly but surely fix this for people. Because again, it is so. How many women struggle with infertility, and everybody looks at them like, why, and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on fertility treatments. Children who are sick, eczema, skin issues, gut issues, and everybody's swallowing their pharmaceuticals for their gut. When I met my wife in 2005, she's like, it's all about the gut, all about the gut. I'm like, what does the gut have to do with the heart? I'm a cardiologist. I spent all these years in medical training. But what does the gut have to do? Can you imagine that, Dr. Peter, that the medical doctors like me think that? What does your gut have to do with your heart? They're two totally separate body parts. Like that is the mindset and the mentality of people. And yeah, it's tough. It's big. But listen, doctors like you and I are very understanding, to these people, the gravitas of what it is. It'd be a lot easier to say, hey, take this pharmaceutical, or hey, take this supplement. It's just not that easy.
Yeah, and I would even say that, with the mole cases I see, they're in my office because they've already gone through the pharmaceutical realm, right? I mean, usually, I'm sure you probably see it similarly. People don't come to us first. They come to us usually after they've gone through kind of a mainstream route and tried, whatever immunosuppressants or anti-inflammatories or antihistamines to navigate their symptom profile. And what they've found is that those drug treatments are lacking and their quality of life is still deteriorating at breakneck speed. And so now they're just looking for, they're looking for a real solution beyond those things. And that's usually where I get them, right? And so then from there, it becomes more of a motivation, right? Because you can take somebody who feels relatively well. Maybe they're living and being exposed to some mold, but it doesn't destroy the quality of their life to such a degree that they're motivated to spend a bunch of money trying to figure that whole thing out, right? But then you have other people whose lives have been destroyed over it, and now they're motivated because they're so sick they have no functionality. They can't get up, they can't think, they're brain fogged to the point of almost dementia. I know with my wife, I had to finish her sentences.
Yeah.
It was bad, and she, she's physically fit. She's in good shape. She was a CrossFitter, and now she's on the couch every day, and she can't think and can't finish her sentences, and she's thinking about suicide. That's to the extent that some people go, right? But so to me, it's the fundamental problem is one, if we can get enough people on board to understand the scope of it. Two, then we can impact meaningful change hopefully within the laws, within the way houses are built. For you to have your cardiology license, or just to have your license, period, you have to meet a standard, right? There's a standard, a minimum standard, and the same thing goes for me. The same thing goes if you have an electrician, there's a minimum standard. A plumber, there's a minimum standard. For builders, there's no minimum standards. There's no licensure that they need. I mean, they have to hire subcontractors that need a license. Like, again, plumbers and electricians need a license, but framers don't need a license. Brickers don't need a license, right? The people that are putting your house up, there's no licensing structure, there's no oversight, and there's no standard of expertise, right, within the industry. And it's all about speed. How fast can we build it? How much can we sell it for? How cheap can we pay for the labor so that we can profit the most? And I really feel like the core of the problem is there. The core of the problem is within the building industry, within the lack of regulation. Not that I want more government regulation, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that the government should control everything, because certainly they've not done a great job on many aspects, but some standard is better than zero standard. And I think you also really should the consideration around insurance, like insurance coverage, because if insurance companies have to pay for it, then they're going to demand that the builders do it better, right? And so everybody wins. At the end of the day, you get a better house that's built, it's well better constructed with the right kinds of materials, with the right kind of expertise to be as preventative as possible, so that insurance companies don't have to come out and pay big settlements for shoddy construction work. But
I know. Yeah, I mean, totally agree on all of those fronts. And I think really, as far as, how do we build with, materials that are not wood is what it is. I mean, I think that, wood is such a, it's so prone, to damage. It becomes impossible to build with wood. All plumbing, all pipes, should be exposed. I think there's a lot of things that we can look at to mitigate that and to lower that down. Let me ask you this. I mean, you do a lot of second opinion consultations after they've seen the medical doctors. What about after they've seen the natural doctors? They've seen the natural doctors, and the natural doctor either didn't mention mold, bacteria, water damage at all, or they kind of gave it like this passing, kind of thing. And then you and I come along and like, oh, no, we don't have to talk about diet again, right? I mean, we've talked about diet a gazillion times. We all know that sleep and sunshine and physical activity is good, right? We all, we know that plastic is bad. We know that EMF and, is bad. We know all of this, but having this kind of front and center conversation of, hey, I've got this epiphany moment for you. But why do you think again, the natural docs are missing this one too?
because it's a hard conversation. For me, I was, 6 years ago, I was contemplating retirement because of this. Like for me, it was, oh, please, Lord, quit sending chronic mole cases to me.
Mm.
Because what you said earlier, the husband's, sitting over here with his, because he goes to work for 16 hours a day and the wife usually stays home. She's definitely the canary. The kids are the canaries. The pets are the canaries. And so what you end up getting is you have to build a very objective data set for that woman, typically woman, not always, but typically, to save her life. So like that's heavy. As a doctor, my job is to help save that person's life, right? And in order to do that, I have to be very, very extremely serious and very meticulous and detail oriented. And so I would be the one after, again, many other doctors that would explore those other potential possibilities and demand, well, I would demand excellence of myself, but I would demand excellence for the person to pursue the cause, right? Because I can do tests to identify known mold exposure, but I can't force somebody's hand to go and get a good mold inspector or to move or whatever that might look like. I can only give them the data and then they have to act on the data, right? You take a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. And that ultimately, that's all of our free will. And I respect that. I respect anybody's decision to do with their life what they want. But it's heavy for me because I take it home. Most good healers are empathetic and they take it home with them. It's heavy on their mind. They're thinking about that person. Are they getting out of that mold? Are they not getting out of that mold? So for me, it was, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to carry that burden anymore. And it was shortly after that, Jack, that we found mold in my house. And then that changed that, that just turned my whole course in a different direction because I knew going through it personally, just how expensive and how struggling it is because you aren't thinking clearly. You're not your best self. You're not your most energetic and brain aware self because of the mold. So going through it just made me realize I can't abandon all these other people because of my own selfish, desire to not have to deal with this problem. This problem isn't going to go away. And I believe personally, I believe it is the epidemic that we're facing in society because well, I mean, we have a lot of epidemics on the food front, but most people, as you said, we've talked about food. We can eat organic, we can go grain free, we can do the things that are necessary around diet. But if you're still sick because your air is poisoning you to death, and you have to address it, and that's the only way around it. And the only way you're going to address it is if you have enough of an objective trail of data that says, okay, I can believe what this doctor's saying. I need to take action on it. But I think a lot of natural docs don't want to have that conversation. It's a hard conversation to have. It's very stressful to talk to you're talking to a family and half the family thinks you're crazy, and they also think that the sick person might be crazy, right? And you have to advocate for that sick person, and that is just tough. It's not poor me. That's not what I'm saying. But you get what I'm saying. It's just a hard thing to do.